Welcome back, everyone. You know I love a good deep dive into human potential, and you've given us a fascinating text to explore this time.
Oh, yeah.
It lays out this intriguing potential equation. Inborn traits plus acquired skills, all multiplied by, wait for it,
Okay.
attitude. What
Interesting.
do you make of that?
It's a really clever way to frame it, isn't it?
Yeah,
It acknowledges that we all come kind of pre-wired with certain strengths and talents, our inborn traits.
right.
Then there's everything we learn and develop through experience, those acquired skills. But it's that attitude factor that's really powerful.
Right. It's like that old saying, your attitude determines your altitude.
Yeah.
But this text takes it a step further. It calls attitude the most important language we possess. How does that resonate with you?
Well, think of it this way. If our brains are like computers, then our attitude is the operating system.
I like that.
Yeah, it influences how we process information, make decisions, and ultimately how we show up in the world.
That's a great analogy. And the text makes a point of saying that even a small shift in attitude can create a ripple effect in all areas of our lives. It's like that butterfly effect concept.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our attitude shapes our expectations, and those expectations influence our actions. If you believe something amazing is possible, you're more likely to take risks, persevere through challenges, and ultimately achieve greater things.
So it's not just about thinking happy thoughts. It's about how those thoughts translate into concrete actions and behaviors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where this whole idea of self-concept comes in. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but the text does a good job of really unpacking it.
Okay, so let's break that down. It sounds a lot like self-esteem, but I'm sensing it's more nuanced than that.
It is. Think of it like this. Self-esteem is how you feel about yourself, your overall sense of worthiness.
Okay.
Self-concept is how you see yourself, the beliefs, assumptions, and narratives you hold about who you are and what you're capable of.
Okay, that's a helpful distinction.
Yeah.
So if I believe I'm not good at math because I struggled with it in school, that's part of my self-concept, even if I feel confident in other areas of my life.
Precisely.
Okay.
And here's where it gets interesting. The text argues that our self-concept isn't something we're born with. It's shaped by our early experiences, the messages we received from caregivers, and the feedback we got from our environment.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If you grow up hearing you're not a math person, it's easy to internalize that belief and carry it with you into adulthood.
Right. And those early experiences can have a profound impact on our self-concept, often in ways we don't even realize. The text gave that fascinating example of the lottery winner paradox.
No.
Have you heard of that?
I have.
Yeah.
It's that phenomenon where people who win big in the lottery often end up broke or unhappy not long after. I'd always found that so baffling.
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it speaks to the power of our self-concept. If someone's internal narrative is rooted in scarcity or a belief that they don't deserve wealth, even a sudden influx of money won't change those deeply ingrained beliefs.
Wow, that's a really powerful example. So they might subconsciously sabotage their newfound wealth because it doesn't align with their self-concept.
Exactly. They haven't addressed the root cause, which is their internal programming. Their self-concept acts as a kind of internal thermostat, keeping them within a familiar, albeit often limiting, comfort zone.
So it's not just about what's happening around us, but how we're wired to deal with it, right?
Right, and that internal programming, that's really what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it makes you think, how much are we really capable of if we could kind of rewire those old thought patterns?
That's a question the text explores with the idea of the 10% myth, this notion that most people only utilize a tiny fraction of their true capabilities.
Yeah, what could we achieve if we tapped into that other 90%?
Exactly. It's an intriguing thought, isn't it?
It is. But how do we even begin to access that hidden potential? Where do we start?
Well, the text suggests one of the biggest roadblocks is our relationship with fear.
Oh.
Specifically, it highlights those two major negative habit patterns we talked about earlier: fear of failure and fear of rejection.
Yeah, those are big ones for sure. They can be pretty debilitating, holding us back from taking risks and pursuing our goals. But I'm curious, beyond just feeling afraid, how do these fears actually show up in our lives, like physically?
That's a great question. The text gets into this fascinating mind-body connection. It explains that when we experience fear, our sympathetic nervous system kicks into gear,
Oh,
triggering what's known as the fight-or-flight response.
right.
Our bodies are flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, preparing us to either confront the threat or flee from it.
So it's like our bodies are hardwired to protect us from danger. Even if that danger is just, say, public speaking or like putting our work out there for criticism.
Exactly. Our ancestors relied on these physiological responses to survive real physical threats, but in modern life, those threats are often more psychological.
Right, yeah.
And the problem is that same physiological response that was meant to keep us safe can also keep us stuck.
Because instead of running from a saber-toothed tiger, we're frozen in fear of sending that email or asking for that raise.
Exactly, yeah, and it's not always obvious.
That's so true.
The text does a great job of outlining how each of those two major fears, fear of failure and fear of rejection, tends to manifest a bit differently in the body.
Okay, so walk us through those differences because I'm ready to learn how to decode my own fear responses.
All right, so with fear of failure, that fight-or-flight response often manifests as a tightness in the chest, a kind of constricted feeling. You might notice yourself wanting to avoid situations where you could potentially mess up or be judged as incompetent.
Oh, that I can't voice that pops up at the worst possible times. I know that feeling all too well.
Exactly. It's that internal critic
Yeah.
telling you to play it safe, to stay small, to avoid the risk of failure at all costs.
And what about fear of rejection? How does that one usually show up physically?
Fear of rejection often shows up as tension in the shoulders, neck, and upper back, that feeling of carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations.
Okay.
It's rooted in that deep-seated need for approval and a fear of being ostracized or abandoned.
So instead of that I can't voice, it's more like the I have to voice,
Yeah.
right? The one that tells you to please everyone else, even if it means sacrificing your own needs or desires.
Precisely. And the text makes a really interesting point about how both of these fears, fear of failure and fear of rejection, often stem from our early experiences.
Huh. Okay.
If we were constantly criticized as children or made to feel like our worth depended on external validation, we're more likely to develop these negative habit patterns.
Which then becomes self-fulfilling prophecies. We avoid risks because we're afraid of failing, and we stay stuck in people-pleasing mode because we're terrified of rejection.
It's a vicious cycle, for sure.
It is.
But thankfully, the text offers some strategies for breaking free from these limiting patterns.
Okay, good.
And it all comes back to that concept we were discussing earlier, our self-concept.
So if our self-concept is essentially the software running in the background of our lives,
Right,
and these fears are rooted in that software,
right.
then it stands to reason that by upgrading our self-concept, we can start to rewrite those fear-based programs, right?
That's the idea. And the text provides some really practical strategies for doing just that. One of the simplest yet most powerful is this idea of consciously cultivating self-love. It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness, compassion, and understanding that we would offer to a dear friend.
I like that. Because we would never tell a friend they're not good enough or that they should be ashamed of their mistakes. Yet we often subject ourselves to that kind of harsh inner dialogue.
It's true, isn't it? We can be our own harshest critics. But the text reminds us that we have the power to change that internal dialogue. It starts with becoming aware of those negative thought patterns and then consciously choosing to challenge and reframe them.
It's like we're hitting the pause button on those old limiting beliefs and choosing to insert a more empowering narrative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the text offers a really practical tool for doing this. It's that simple phrase, I like myself.
Okay.
The idea is that by repeating this phrase regularly, even if we don't fully believe it at first, we're essentially reprogramming our subconscious mind.
It's like we're planting seeds of self-acceptance and self-love that over time can blossom into more positive and empowering self-concept.
I like that analogy. And as our self-concept shifts, so too do our perceptions of our limitations. We start to see challenges not as threats, but as opportunities for growth and learning.
That reminds me of that famous quote by Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it's done. Our self-concept can either be the thing that holds us back or the force that propels us forward.
Absolutely. And you know, one of the most powerful ways we can strengthen our self-concept is by changing how we relate to criticism. Not just the criticism we receive from others, but more importantly, the criticism we direct toward ourselves.
Oh, that inner critic can be brutal sometimes. It's like it's always waiting to pounce on our mistakes and reminds us of all our shortcomings.
It's true. But the text emphasizes that we don't have to be victims of our inner critic. We can learn to observe those critical thoughts without judgment and choose to respond to them with self-compassion.
So instead of beating ourselves up for not being perfect, we can approach our mistakes as opportunities for learning and growth.
Exactly. It's about shifting from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, embracing the belief that we are capable of change and that our abilities are not set in stone. And this applies not just to ourselves, but also to how we interact with others.
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
Because often the way we criticize others is a reflection of the way we criticize ourselves.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The text highlights the importance of offering feedback in a way that's constructive and supportive, focusing on the behavior rather than the person.
So instead of saying, you always make that mistake, we could say, hey, I noticed this happened, and I'm wondering if there's a different approach we could try next time.
Exactly. It's about framing feedback in a way that empowers others to grow and improve, just as we're learning to do for ourselves. And, this whole conversation has really driven home a powerful message for me.
What's that?
It's this idea that understanding and cultivating our potential isn't just about achieving personal success. It's about recognizing that we all have a unique contribution to make to the world. And the more we embrace our own potential, the more we empower others to do the same.
That's beautifully said. It's like that ripple effect we talked about earlier. By stepping into our own greatness, we inspire others to do the same. Well, I don't know about you, but this deep dive has left me feeling incredibly inspired.
Me too. It's a powerful reminder that we are all capable of far more than we often give ourselves credit for.
To our amazing listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of human potential. We hope you found these insights as valuable as we have.
And remember, the power to unlock your potential lies within you. It's a journey of self-discovery, self-compassion, and a willingness to challenge those limiting beliefs that no longer serve you.
Beautifully said. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep diving deep.